Good afternoon. We are so excited. We are so excited. We are so excited that you are joining us for another invigorating, educational, inspiring, and empowering Bible study at 1 p.m. on this fine Tuesday afternoon of our wonderful time together at Trinity United Church of Christ in Gary, Indiana. We have been so excited about this awesome and wonderful Bible study that we have been engaging in during our time together in recent weeks. Family, I know I say this about every Bible study, but seriously, I definitely mean it this time. I am so excited. I am so excited. I am so excited about our topic for today. If you don't have this book, I don't know what you're waiting for. We need you to grab this book. We need you to grab this book. I know you're probably saying to yourself, damn, what book are you talking about? Oh, I'm so glad that you asked. There is an amazing book that we need you to check out. That is the source of our Bible study. It's the source of our Bible study class. The name of this book is called Psalms for Black Lives. Psalms for Black Lives. Psalms for Black Lives. And let me tell you something. This book is amazing. This book is amazing. Here is the cover of this book, Psalms for Black Lives, Reflections for the Work of Liberation, by a wonderful clergy couple by the name of Gabby Cudjoe Wilkes and Andrew Wilkes. They have penned this awesome book that invites us to think about the Psalms through the lens of Black liberation. And in some sense, they're also inviting us to look at these Psalms through the lens of self-care for Black liberation. That is the backdrop to this topic. And so, in some sense, while we want to do the work of focusing on Black liberation, it's so important for us also to engage in the work of self-care while we are yet caring for others by protesting or participating in activism for the needs of others. We have to also take care of ourselves. And so, in some sense, this book, it is inviting us to reflect on how are we caring for ourselves in the midst of caring for others. If you haven't had opportunity to grab this book, let me encourage you. This book is amazing. Please, please, please grab it and check it out. You can use this book as a morning meditation before you start your day in the morning. You could also use this book as a nightly meditation before you go to sleep at night. Please grab this book. And so, family, we want to let you know that we are excited because today we're going to be talking about a particular chapter in this book. The particular chapter in this book is a song. And I hope you have pen and paper. I hope you have pen and paper handy. The particular psalm that we are going to focus on today is Psalm 71. That's right, Psalm 71. We are going to check out Psalm 71. And so we're going to ask, if you don't mind, that you grab your Bible and check out Psalm 71. And we're going to read this psalm from the New Revised Standard Version, the NRSV version. So let's check it out together. Psalm 71. In you, O Lord, I take refuge. Let me never be put to shame. In your righteousness, deliver me and rescue me. Incline your ear to me and save me. Be to me a rock of refuge, a strong fortress to save me. For you are my rock and my fortress. Rescue me, oh my God, from the hand of the wicked. from the grasp of the unjust and cruel. For you, O Lord, are my hope, my trust, O Lord, from my youth. Upon you I have leaned from my birth. It was you who took me from my mother's womb. My praise is continually of you. I have been like a portent to many, but you are my strong refuge. My mouth is filled with your praise and with your glory all day long. Do not cast me off in the time of old age. Do not forsake me when my strength is spent. For my enemies speak concerning me, and those who watch for my life consult together. They say, pursue and seize that person whom God has forsaken, for there is no one to deliver. O God, do not be far from me. Oh my God, make haste to help me. Let my accusers be put to shame and consumed. Let those who seek to hurt me be covered with scorn and disgrace. But I will hope continually and will praise you yet more and more. My mouth will tell of your righteous acts, of your deeds of salvation all day long. Though their number is past my knowledge, I will come praising the mighty deeds of the Lord God. I will praise your righteousness, yours alone. O God, from my youth you have taught me, and I still proclaim your wondrous deeds. So even to old age and gray hairs, O God, do not forsake me until I proclaim your might to all the generations to come. Your power and your righteousness, O God, reach the high heavens. You who have done great things, O God, who is like you? You who have made me see many troubles and calamities will revive me again. From the depths of the earth, you will bring me up again. You will increase my honor and comfort me once again. I will also praise you with the harp for your faithfulness, O my God. I will sing praises to you with the lyre. O Holy One of Israel, my lips will shout for joy when I sing praises to you. My soul also, which you have rescued, all day long, my tongue will talk of your righteous help. For those who have tried to do me harm have been put to shame and disgrace. Now, there's two particular passages of this text that our authors want us to focus on. There are two particular passages that our authors want us to focus on. Here are the particular passages. First and foremost, our authors want us to take a grasp at looking at verse 6 of this Psalm 71 text. Verse 6. Look at verse 6 again. Verse 6 reads, "Upon you I have learned from my birth. It was you who took me from my mother's womb." Our authors want us to read this text through the lens of God's care for us from the beginnings of our life all the way to the ends of our life. From beginnings of our life when we were even yet a baby in our mother's womb to wherever we find ourselves right now on life's journey. So verse 6 is the first verse our authors want us to pay attention to. And the second verse our authors want us to pay attention to is verse 17. "O God, from my youth you have taught me, and I still proclaim your wondrous deeds. So even to old age and gray hairs, O God, do not forsake me." Our authors want us to see that the psalmist is speaking about the ways in which God has been present in verses 17 and 18, even until we grow old. And so in some sense, the focus or theme of this Psalm 71 is, how do we remember the ways in which God has carried us throughout all the days of our life. How do we remember the ways in which God has been with us throughout all the days of our life, from the time we were children until the current age that we are today? Let me pause for a second and say, in some sense, as we enter into moving to our period of Thanksgiving, we want to, on this November 1st, begin to reflect on what are the ways in which God has been with us, even yet while we were children. And how do we use those remembrances to carry us forward? Our pastor preached about this past Sunday, about the power of remembering and how memory continues to serve us, even in the midst of the current crisis that we face. And so this Psalm 71 text finds the psalmist living out that dynamic. And our authors begin to explain to us that even in the midst of the crisis that we face today, how do we participate in the act of remembering how God was with us in our early lives and how God continues to be with us currently? So, your first reflective activity is to think about an experience from your childhood, from your youth. Name a time in your life when you were a child in your youth, where you experienced God as being with you. I'll pause there for a second for you to reflect on that question and jot that question down. Name a time in your life when you thought God was not with me, God was not going to be with me, God was nowhere to be found. And then as a child, I ended up experiencing God with me. As a youth, as a baby, I ended up experiencing God as with me. Think about that moment in your life. Think about that time. Think about that time. Now that you have that moment in your mind, I want you to do an exercise. Every time you experience crisis, every time you experience some sort of painful moment, how do you tap into that moment? How do you tap into that experience that you experienced as a child? And how do you remember, in some sense, that the same God who was with you when you were a child, when you were a youth, that's the same God who is with you even in this current crisis that you are facing? That experience from your childhood becomes a wonderful pastoral care strategy to provide care to yourself in the midst of the crisis that you are experiencing right now. Let me pause here. For a second and tell you about something that I hold on to that was an experience from my youth that I continue to hold on to and remember even to this day. When I was a child, my father and my mother divorced. My mother would later go on to remarry another gentleman who was my stepfather. But here's the gentleman that I, for the longest, have acknowledged ever since I was 3 or 4 years old as my father. And I'll never forget, this gentleman began to raise me with particular beliefs. There was 2 beliefs that he raised me to reflect on. From the moment I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I started learning how to read, my father, Calvin Williams, would every morning before I would go to school, before I left the house to go to school, he would have me recite 2 important passages. Number 1, he would have me recite Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 18. That passage is known as putting on the full armor of God. You see, my dad was a military veteran, and he was big on military language. And he seemed to love Apostle Paul's teachings about the full armor of God, the putting on the full armor of God. And so every day before I would head out, he would say, Danielle, did you put your full armor on? And that would be a note to me to go back into my room, pull out my Bible, and read Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 18. And then the second passage that he would make me recite is the 10-point platform of the Black Panther Party. You see, my father was also a Black Panther. And he would also say, did you recite the 10-point platform of the Black Panther Party today? And if I said, no, I forgot, he would say, go back to your room, pull out this paper that I gave you and recite the 10-point platform for the Black Panther Party. And so when I think about the days of my youth, messages that were given to me as a small child, dating back to when I was 7 years old, to how I had to recite Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10 through 18, and the Black Panther Party's 10-point platform from the time I was 7 years old to the time I moved out of my parents' house at 17 years old. For 10 years, I had to recite these two passages every day, from my youth to my old age, to the point where now I'm 43. Every morning before I leave the house, I'll pull out my Bible and still read Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 18. And I still recite the Black Panther Party 10-point platform, right? In some sense, this is an example of what our authors of our text want us to remember. What were the messages given to you when you were young, right? Maybe the messages were, God is covering you with God's holy armor from Ephesians 6, 10 through 18. Maybe the messages were, you are culturally a proud Black person from the 10-point platform of the Black Panther Party. How do you begin to remember these messages from your youth? This is what the psalmist was doing in this Psalm 71 text. And so, just as our pastor preached this past Sunday, sometimes when we face crisis, amnesia sets in that causes us to want to forget the wonderful messages that we learned from our youth. This Psalm 71 text is reminding us to think about the ways in which God has been with us, even from the time we were yet in our mother's womb, even as we progressed through childhood and then being a youth, moving through young adulthood, and then where we experience our lives today. I want to pause there for a second. Can you talk about lessons you learned from your youth that now, in the spirit of what the psalmist did in Psalm 71, continue to be wonderful lessons you hold on to and uplift, even at this stage in your life? I'll pause there for a minute if anybody wants to say anything, or our pastor wants to highlight something.
That's such a powerful picture you painted, and how your dad poured into you. That's just powerful. No one else. We've got a few people on. Nobody has posted anything yet, but I'll share that I knew God. I knew God was with me afterwards. It wasn't in this situation. So I grew up in two churches, and one of the churches was a Pentecostal church, First Progressive Church of Christ. And so at First Progressive Church of Christ, there was a large youth ministry. My parents went to two separate churches, but they didn't have any issues that divided them. One of the major reasons was my dad's church, the Pentecostal church, had a larger youth ministry. So they would take the youth on a retreat, right? And so they would separate the boys and the girls. And so the boys would bunk together and the girls would bunk, And so we had, a young adult chaperone. And one night, we just talking, he wants to talk about, got us to talking about the Bible. And somehow, you know, I don't know how he got to it. He started talking about hell, about going to hell and things like that, which, you're going to do in a Pentecostal church. You're going to talk about trying to stay out of hell, right? Well, I mean, and I've told this before. I mean, I had, the Temptations had just come out with this song. I'm telling you the natural facts for what it's worth. You make your own heaven and hell right here on earth. Wow. And so when he's talking about that, I said, you know what? For me, there ain't no heaven. And they said, what? I said, there's no hell, there's no heaven. You make your own heaven and hell right here on earth. So,
wow.
So, the song stuck with me because it made a lot of sense. It really stuck with me. It was something that spiritually I clung to. But also I was kind of precocious and I wanted to just kind of disturb things. And so I never will forget, he said he couldn't deal with it. So he said, excuse me, I'm gonna be right back. And he went and got the pastor. And the pastor came in the room and I said, oh Lord, I'm in trouble now. And his pastor said, now look here, young Jackson. Now what did you say here? What did you say about hell? And I repeated, I said, there ain't no heaven and hell. You make your heaven and hell right here on earth. He said, now Jackson, now you do believe that there is this thing, and I forgot how he phrased it. It phrased it in a way that made me easy to say, yeah, I get that. He said, oh, okay. And so it wasn't until it was like later on that week, we got back and my daddy never said anything to me, but I knew something was there. And Mama said, what did you say? Oh my goodness. They are all talking about you at the church.
Wow.
And I said, oh my goodness. But again, nothing ever happened. My parents never chastised me. They never said I was wrong, anything like that. And it was at that moment where, I realized a little clip that God is with me and God is speaking to me. And, and at that point, I'm 10, 11 years old, something like that. And that's when I realized God is giving me some messages, that are probably not going to sit well with some of the older folks. So I probably need to be a little more judicious in how I share them. But yeah, I never forgot that one.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. Oh, wow. That's beautiful. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Our authors also want to highlight a second point in how we understand a simple yet interesting question. Aside from caring for ourselves, we also have a responsibility to care for other people. So while we use stories from our childhood to encourage ourselves, how do we also care for others in light of the stages of life that people find themselves on? In some sense, pastors Gabby and Andrew Wilkes highlight that Psalm 71 is really about the psalmist talking about the ways in which God has been with him at every stage of his life development. Think about that for a second. Our authors invite us to think about how do we care for people who are at various stages of life development. So now we're going to talk a little psychology. We're going to talk a little psychology. If it is in fact the case that we are called to care for people at various stages of their life development, that means we also have to know, where are people in their whole life development? Where do people find themselves at various stages of their life? There is a particular theorist by the name of Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson. Erikson. Erik Erikson. Erikson. Eric Erickson believed that, he is a famous psychologist who believed that at each stage of someone's life, someone experiences a major crisis. There's a major crisis that persons experience at each stage of their life, from the time they enter the world and are born till the time they reach senior citizen age and then go into eternity and meet God. Eric Erickson believed that the ultimate point in life is how to survive each crisis that comes. Now, isn't that interesting? Eric Erickson doesn't believe that crisis may come. Eric Erickson doesn't believe that you could live your life in such a way where you could avoid crisis. No. First and foremost, Eric Erickson promotes this belief that says crisis is always going to show up in your life. Let's pause for a moment. That should be an aha moment for someone today. Maybe somebody is feeling down and out and upset because they find themselves in crisis. We want you to know that crisis is unavoidable. Crisis is something that you're going to always have to experience. A famous pastoral theologian by the name of Lee Butler, his professor of pastoral care and academic dean of a seminary named Phillips Theological Seminary in Tulsa, Oklahoma, penned this wonderful book entitled Liberating Our Dignity, Saving Our Souls. I hope you can grab that book, family. The name of it again is called Liberating Our Dignity, Saving Our Souls. And in this book, Dr. Lee Butler suggests, just like Eric Erickson, that everybody goes through crisis. Black folks especially know what crisis has always been, because from the inception of African enslavement from 1619 to 1865, through the period of Jim Crow from 1865 to 1954, through the period of civil rights movement from the 1950s to the 60s and even into the 70s, all the way to the period of Black Lives Matter in this current era that we're living in. We've always had to come through a period of crisis, no matter what that crisis was. But Dr. Butler says the key to crisis is learning how to be creative in the midst of the crisis. Dr. Lee Butler suggests what makes human beings, Black people in particular, successful is that they have learned how to be creative in the midst of crisis. So he penned a famous quote that says, "Crisis breeds creativity." Crisis breeds creativity. Dr. Lee Butler says, no matter what you face in life, the question that you have to ask yourself is, how am I called to be creative in the midst of this crisis I'm experiencing today? He says, in some sense, persons who do not remain progressive, persons who wrestle with stagnation are really people who have not figured out how to be creative in the midst of crisis. And so in some sense, Lee Butler loves the work of Eric Erickson. And Lee Butler says, yes, at every stage of human development, from the time you're a child until the time you are an adult, you have to figure out what is the crisis you're experiencing at that stage of your life, and how do you be creative to survive it, and not just survive it, but also thrive in it. We're not called to simply survive crisis. We're called to thrive in the midst of crisis. So now, a question that we have to grapple with is, as we seek to care for other people, we have to become aware about the crisis that people experience at each stage of their life. That's the best way we can care for folks. Our authors of this book, Song for Black Lives, suggest that we have to become self-aware about the crisis that people experience at each stage of their life in order to know how to care for them. So I'm going to place an image on our screen to let you know about the particular crisis that people experience. at each stage of their life. Check out this image for a moment. This image was created by Erik Erikson. And this image speaks to each crisis that all human beings experience at each stage of their life development. This image starts with the red graphic that you see entitled Infancy. We start at that starting place on this circle, infancy. Erik Erikson says, from the time children are young and are babies, their first crisis that they have to learn how to maneuver is whether or not they can trust the persons who they have been given to or given over to care for them. Oftentimes, this is their parents. Erik Erikson suggests children, babies in particular, wrestle with, can I trust this mom that has been the one assigned to me to care for me? Can I trust this dad who has been assigned to care for me? Oftentimes, Erik Erikson said, when you meet adults today who wrestle with trust issues, this was birthed in the very beginning of their life when they realized unconsciously or consciously, I can't trust my mom or dad. My mom and dad are not going to care for me. And so helping people to learn how to trust as adults is really about working with them to rebuild trust from their infancy stage when they were babies, and helping them to reconcile and heal from the fact that they haven't been able to trust their mom or they haven't been able to trust their dad. Gabby Wilkes and Andrew Wilkes suggest how we care for some people today is to help people realize they can trust. And the way we help them realize that is by helping them to reconcile their parental relationships. Or if they can't reconcile that parental relationship, make peace with that parental relationship and begin to learn to trust others. Erik Erikson believed the second stage of human life development was early childhood. Early childhood. This is the toddler stage where children begin to wrestle with, okay, how much autonomy do I have? We usually know this stage as the terrible two stage, where 2-year-olds are wrestling with, what can I do? What can't I do? 2-year-olds begin to wrestle with their sense of free will, autonomy. And if they don't have free will or autonomy, or if they can't see that they have free will or autonomy, they begin to wrestle with shame and doubt. And so in some sense, struggles that people have today around, what am I called to do? What am I called to be? Erik Erikson says that's because in early childhood, people never figured out what was their own sense of free will and being. And so now shame and doubt creeps up and keeps people from living into their true calling and authentic purpose. And so number 2, we are called to help people remember that they can resist shame and doubt and live into their true and authentic, liberating and freedom-seeking call, identity and purpose. Number 3, during the preschool age category, children begin to wrestle with how to take initiative. Now that you feel your sense of freedom from your early childhood, now that you feel your sense of autonomy, what do you do with that? How do you now initiate living and being? How do you initiate, okay, I gotta learn how to tie my shoe, or I gotta start going to school and doing work. Nobody's just gonna care for me anymore. In some sense, our authors highlight, from Eric Erickson's perspective, folks today who wrestle with getting up and being active and doing something, folks today who wrestle with under functioning and not showing initiative or not being motivated. There's a belief that says they're still grappling with that because they never learned that during their preschool years. They never transitioned from simply being taken care of as an infant or in their early childhood. They never really quite learned that you have to be self-motivated. You have to get up and do something in life. For some reason, they never learned that lesson from their preschool. And now that lesson continues to invade their adulthood age. There should be something that you're taking away, and that Eric Erickson believed when we don't learn these lessons from our childhood, they don't magically disappear. We continue to mature into adulthood and wrestle with those same issues. So if you didn't learn to be trusting of your mom and dad in your infant stage, you're going to wrestle with trust issues in your adult stage. If you didn't learn how to live into your own free will and be autonomous in your early childhood years, you're going to still wrestle with shame and doubt and what's my call, what's my purpose into your adulthood years. If you didn't learn how to take initiative and have motivations and get up and work and do something in your preschool years, you're still going to wrestle with that in your adulthood years. When I turn to my left and turn to my right and talk to my sisters who have a belief system that they're going to get married and have a man take care of them, I say to myself, oh, you never got that lesson of being taking initiative and being self-motivated and caring for yourself in your preschool years, right? You believe that now it should be somebody else's job, a man's job, to take care of you, right? That's where that comes from. I'll pause there. I'm going to pause there for a moment as we think about this infancy, early childhood, and preschool years, and how do we journey with people to care for people, to help people build trust, to help people build autonomy, to help people take initiative and be self-motivated?
Wow. This is Kathleen, on that there's crisis at every stage of life. She printed that it is just part of living, and we have to trust and keep looking up to God. Myra Akins in this graph, and by the way, I need a copy of this graph.
Oh, yes.
For use it again. And the book that Eric Erickson, the book,
Okay.
that particular book of that. But Myra Akins says this is a great reference chart for understanding emotional development throughout life. And she says it also explains why some people act as they do. And I was, as you were going, and then I was just looking ahead, I was like, yep. And I see myself in there. I will admit there's a part on that graph, that school age graph, and I've shared it with you all before, that in the 5th grade, I was put in the EMH room, the educatively mentally handicapped. And it was really a wrong done because my 4th grade teacher did not do well with students. In fact, not long after that, she left and taught in a university. Wow. She really shouldn't have been teaching in the 4th grade, but she sent me to the EMH room, and for a year, I was McDade School. They had mobile units, and it was just us. It was just boys. There were only boys in the EMH room. There were, as I remember, wow, there were no girls.
Wow.
It just hit me that it
wow.
was boys, and it was
wow.
about 7 of us in EMH room in the mobile unit, and everybody else was in the main building. And whenever we had recess and we all together, we were looked down on as the dummies, the stupid ones, wow, and all of that. And my parents had to battle the whole year Chicago Public Schools to get me out of there. So the next year when I get into sixth grade, I walk into sixth grade feeling very unsure, very uncertain about myself. And that has carried through my life up to today. I wrestled with that. There were a lot of lessons in the fifth grade you're supposed to get about how to write, how to do this. I didn't get.
Wow.
And I've wrestled with that ever since.
Wow.
So that graph is it. Kathleen says, I guess the absolute wrong that happened to me. And then she says, I have had someone tell me that I would never understand the didactic portions of becoming a respiratory technologist. Wow.
Wow. Wow. Wow. Wow. Wow. I so appreciate you. I so appreciate you lifting this up, because I earnestly believe that this is the work of Christianity.
Yeah.
The work of Christianity is to look at this chart and see the struggles that people have, and to figure out how do we minister to people with these particular struggles at these particular ages in their life. I'm going to be vulnerable and share also, given where I am at with my age, my particular struggle that I've been wrestling with, like right now, today. And so this becomes applicable for all of us. And I want to invite all of us to be vulnerable, to think about wherever your age is on this chart, how do you think about these struggles, and minister to yourself in the midst of these crises, the life crisis that you are experiencing. And so continuing on, Erik Erikson believed at school age years, the green portion of the image, at school age years is where school age children begin to wrestle with a sense of work versus inferiority. Feelings of inferiority really begin to set in at our school age years. When we say inferiority or industry versus inferiority, what we really mean by that is what Erik Erikson believed was it is at the school age years that children at this age begin to wrestle with, do I have what it takes to compete in the larger world, in the larger industry? Or am I inferior to other folks? Am I inferior to other folks, right? This is what makes, during the civil rights movement, our desires to push for board of education rights, that all children should go to the same schools, or diverse children should mix, because during the civil rights era, we began to see psychologists, Black psychologists were saying, by keeping Black children separate in a different educational school system, they are really, because of Erik Erikson's theory, they're really gaining a sense of inferiority, believing that they can't compete. They can't compete with their white counterparts. That's why they are separated. That's why the Supreme Court has separated them. And so an argument that many psychologists made that civil rights leaders picked up on was that separating persons by race in different schools is actually doing a disservice, because now those students won't be able to compete. They'll internalize a sense of inferiority to white students as they mature into adulthood, and they'll never believe that they could compete on the same level. Side note, just to tickle your fancy, and I don't want to get into this, just want to throw this out. I want to get into it. Come on. But this has been some of the thoughts we've thought about with HBCUs. We have tend to celebrate our HBCUs because they create cultural pride, right? But then there's also a wonderment around, is there a disservice about our HBCUs in some sense. While giving this cultural pride reinforcement that's so important, is there also some sense of inferiority that is being built up where African American students in college are not able to feel like they can compete against students who also went to predominantly white institutions or PWIs. That's been a argument, if you will. I'll pause there for a second.
Yeah, and the articles the other way too, because white students being segregated develop inferiority, and in that inferiority, it morphs into super ego. In other words, I don't really feel I could compete with these Black folk because when we watch them on the human stage, they seem to thrive. So therefore, I need to remember I am white and I am over them to build up, my ego. So it is a interesting discussion, and I would have gone to a HBCU had I been cognizant of what I was going to do with my life. But at that moment, I made a decision based on what was there before me. And so I didn't go. So, for me to comment in that way, because it would be good to hear from you. But you're right. That's a real good discussion. In fact, I heard one of our young adults who went to a university other than the HBCU heard me talking about HBCU and pulled me aside afterwards and said, "So, Rev Jackson, all of us didn't go to the white schools because we thought those were inferior. We just wanted to go to this school and interact with others in a broader spectrum." And so I said, I got it, and I never meant to say that that's why that until you corrected me. You corrected me. Well, you helped me make sure that I put in the nuances when I do that. So it's powerful. That's powerful. Kathleen says, "I'm not sure about this. I believe that attending an HBCU makes a difference in a young person's life." True.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Most definitely. Most definitely.
Yeah, that's good. This is good.
Most definitely. Most definitely. We also see now moving into adolescence, people wrestle with, our adolescent children wrestle with identity versus role confusion. Identity versus role confusion. Identity versus role confusion. It is at this point of adolescent years when our children, as adolescents, moving into the teenage years, began to wrestle with, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And what am I called to be and do? And so if we meet adults who are continuing to wrestle with identity, we say it's because they never figured it out in their adolescence. And so how we care for folks, African-American persons in particular, how we care for people how we care for people in some sense is to invite them to reflect on, in some sense, what is your identity? Who are you? Who are you and what are you called to be and do on this earth? Who are you and what are you called to be and do on this earth? We also now experience our young adults, the 20-year-old age gap, wrestling with intimacy versus isolation. There's desires to think about, who am I to love? Who loves me? Who are my friends? Who are people who should be in my life for the rest of my life? I don't want to be isolated. I want to find a romantic relationship, or I want to find some sort of collegial relationship. I want to find a fraternity or sorority or group that could give me a sense of belonging. This is in some sense why when we think about ministering to young adults, we have to take into consideration how are we ministering to them in such a way that supports their desire to find community. How are we ministering to young adults that supports their desires to find community? That is the crisis that they are wrestling with at that phase and stage of their life, looking for community, right? And so in some sense, it's frivolous to say such language as isolate yourselves in the midst of COVID-19, because at their age, they're not looking for isolation. We started to see this during the height of the pandemic, when there were so many calls for social distancing, and we wondered why young people were not social distancing, while some young people were still going out, hanging out with family and friends, hanging out with friends and clubs, whatever that club was. Because from a psychosocial perspective, we didn't understand that they are currently living a life where they're looking for intimacy. They're not wanting to be socially distant. They're not looking for isolation. And how do we respond to that? How do we respond to that? Next, middle adulthood. There is a wrestle around generativity versus stagnation. Generativity versus stagnation. I told you earlier, I'm 43 years old. I'm known as a middle adult age, and that is my current wrestle in life. The wrestle I feel at this stage is, am I living out my true life mission and purpose, or am I being stagnant in my life? What am I doing to give back to the world? If I was to die right now, how would I be remembered for what I gave to the world? This is the question that middle adult people like myself wrestle with. What was my contribution to the world? I wrestle with that. That is my struggle. I wake up in the morning and sometimes I say, Danielle, what are you doing with your life? Like how have you really contributed? How have you really contributed to the world? Right? If you was to drop dead right now and meet God, and God said, Danielle, what did you do with your life? You know, what could I say that I actually have done with my life that really mattered? Other than gaining material possessions, like trying to buy a house or trying to buy a nice car or trying to get some degrees and extra letters behind my name, right? Mm-hmm. The ultimate goal that middle adulthood folks wrestle with is, how am I giving back to the larger world? What do I want to be remembered for? Mm-hmm. And so how we minister to people in my age category is to help us reflect on, okay, what am I doing that's really contributing to the world? And how do I take peace in that? Or if I don't feel like I'm really giving to the world, and I really feel like I'm being stagnant, how do you help me not be stagnant? How do you help me break free from the barriers of being stagnant and encourage somebody like me to contribute to the world, contribute to the community, contribute to larger society? Mm-hmm. I'll pause there for a moment.
This is something. You know, one of the things that in that space, I guess I have moved on to that next block, maturity, ego, integrity, and despair. But one of the things that at this stage, I really am driven to do as much as I can, and I'm trying to create ways to do more, is for the young adult and the middle adulthood to have platforms to contribute to life, to people, to pour into, because folk like you have so much insight and authenticity, most importantly, that doesn't get witnessed on a broad scale enough. It may get witnessed in small sections of your interaction, but I believe more exposure helps with that piece about what am I doing with my life? As you see people, and as people are able to pour back into you and say, you know what, this, like this here, this really put me in a different space of understanding. So yeah.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
And I so am appreciative of you and the platform given to me, like these Tuesday Bible studies, because yes, it helps me myself feel like, okay, you're really doing something that matters.
Yeah.
You're doing something. You're doing something that matters.
Yeah. And more platforms to come. So get ready.
I receive it. I receive it.
Yeah.
And so last but not least, the maturity stage is where adults, past the young adult stage, past the middle adult stage, begin to wrestle with looking back over one's life and reflecting on, did what I do matter? Have I really given my all in all? And this is where we have to minister to our older adults who wrestle with, did I have a life of integrity, or did I have a life of despair? And we have to do a lot of encouraging our older adults to say, no, you live the life of integrity. You live the life of integrity. Interestingly enough, if we go back to our Psalms, there are some psychologists who look at the Psalms through the lens of David's own life and say it was near this stage of maturity where David began to reflect on, did he live a life of integrity or not? Right. And so sometimes we're reading the Psalms through his own wrestles with, wow, what have I did with my life that really mattered versus what did I do with my life that was really messed up? So there are some psychologists who read David's own life through this lens of, as he got older, he started to wrestle with his actions with Bathsheba. He started to wrestle with his actions with Rizpah. He started to wrestle with different things he had done in life that may have been a challenge or threat to his integrity. And sometimes, depending on the age of the particular song that David was at when he penned that song, you really read his wrestle between integrity versus despair. And so if we could provide David with spiritual care, we would remind David of all the wonderful things he did in life that were wonderful, were amazing, were awesome. All of the wonderful things that he did in life that did matter, that did mean something in the life of people. And so that's how we minister to our older adult population, by reaffirming with a sense of compassion and sensitivity all of the things that our older adults have done that have really mattered, have been wonderful, and have really been life-giving in the lives of other people. Right? And so we could say that about you, Pastor Jackson, that you have been amazing. You've been a phenomenal pastor. As we come up on your pastoral anniversary, you have been an amazing and phenomenal pastor, and you have really been life-giving in the lives of so many people that you don't even know. People you have touched so many people's lives, and you don't even know the number of lives you have touched through your ministry. And so that becomes so important to also lift up.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Myra
so
asked the question.
Oh, sorry.
What happened? I'm sorry. Myra asked the question, what happens when there is arrested development or one becomes stuck in one of those stages?
Thank you so much for asking that question. That is a perfect question that Eric Erickson pushed us to think about, because in some sense, Eric Erickson said, here's where this gets a little sad to me. But Eric Erickson believed Just because you grow older, age-wise, if you never made peace with that crisis and learned that lesson at each one of those stages, you'll continue to live that crisis out. So again, if I learned early on as a baby that I could not trust my mother and father, those trust issues continue to stay with me all the way to my present age where I'm at right now. If I learned in my adolescent years, if I learned, I can't figure out my identity. I'm confused about who I am. I'm confused about what I'm called to do. Even if I'm 80 or 90 years old, I'll still continue to struggle with my identity because I never learned that lesson in my adolescent year. And so these crises stay with us. If we haven't figured them out, Eric Erickson believed if you've never figured out each one of these crises at your given age, they'll continue to stay with you. So you will have grown to be a certain age physically, but you'll still be the same age emotionally at the space and place of that crisis that you never figured out or never made peace with. So oftentimes when we run into adults, something that I've often tried to train myself, I mess up miserably, but something that I try to train myself with, I messed this up miserably, I'm trying to get it, but I ain't got it, but I'm trying to get it. Something that we have taught to learn to do in chaplaincy field is when you see an adult that's, I'm just gonna throw out a random number. When you see an adult that's 50 years old, and you see that they're frustrated, annoyed, or angry, and something is not quite right with their emotional state, how do you look at them as a child who is still stuck at one of them stages from their childhood that they never made peace with? Maybe they're still stuck at early childhood or preschool or school age crisis on that chart that I share. Like a strategy that we have to begin to incorporate is every time we see an adult who is exhibiting certain behavior, how to respond to them as the broken child from that stage that they're at, not responding to them as an adult. So I might meet somebody that's 50 years old, but might be stuck at an adolescent, emotional adolescence age where they're still trying to wrestle with who they are and they're wrestling with their identity. So I'm not looking at a 50-year-old or 60-year-old who technically has aged to the age of maturity. I'm really looking at an adult that's carrying the emotional state of an adolescence inside of them. And that's who they're really acting out. Or if I'm looking at a young adult that's in their 20s, but unfortunately their mother and father exhibited that they could not be, that they could not be trusting, and that this child couldn't trust in them. I'm not looking at an average 20-year-old. I'm looking at a little baby that's still wrestling with trust from what their mom and dad did not do in their lives. And so that's how we have to practice. I'm nowhere at time, I'm sorry. We have to practice that in some sense. We got to figure out how to practice that.
No, that's good work. Yeah. I would just say, because I know we're at time, that's where community comes in so big, because this is exhausting, and where you face an adult who really did not get past the school age or one of those areas, and they throw temper tantrums and pout, and they're in a ministry and they decide, I'm gonna hold the ministry hostage. I'm not gonna show up. I want people to come and, and for one person like the pastor or, somebody to have to deal with that, it takes the community. It takes the community, because we meet folk like that, and then we are in our own areas of, where we got hindered at in some places. So this is unbelievable. Thank you so much.
No problem. No problem.
God.
No problem. No problem. I have had a blast. As always. As always.
Yeah, you all please share this after we sign off. Please share this and tag people. That helps people pay attention to it, because this lesson, and I love the illustration because it was in a circle and not linear, and it shows an African perspective of life. And so there's some more to say about that. We don't have time to, but thank you all so much. And so we look forward to seeing you next week. Again, share this wonderful and incredible message.